Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
May I call Alisdair Cameron, please?
Yes.
I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Cameron. As you know, my name is Jason Beer, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Alisdair Charles John Cameron.
Thank you for providing a long and detailed witness statement to the inquiry. It's dated the 18th of April 2024. It's 115 pages long. Can we look at that, please? It's WITN 0984 0100, and you should have a hard copy.
I do.
I think there are 5 corrections that you wish to make to it. Can we go through each of those in turn, please?
There are 6. There was one I put forward to the inquiry a couple of days ago.
Yes, I've left one out because it was just a grammar or a syntax one about a full stop.
Right.
And so I've cut that one. Page 42, please.
Yep.
And if we look at paragraph 177 towards the bottom of the page,
Yep.
in the second line, there's a line which says, according to my diary, took place on the 4th of March 2014. Should that be the 4th of March 2015?
It should.
So 4th of March 2015, please.
Yep.
Page 67 is the second correction. And it's paragraph 279, again at the foot of the page.
Yep.
And in the second line, there's a document referred to, Poll 3002 1446, which is dated as the 28th of June 2016, whereas it should be the 28th of June 2018.
Yes.
And then over the page, please. The last line reads, this...
Sorry, Mr. Beer, that last one, a reference to 2018 in the second line, does that have any effect on the 2016 in the first line?
Oh,
Yes.
I think it does. Sorry, it should all be 2018, this
Yes.
paragraph.
Right,
No, I
fine.
apologise.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you.
And then over the page to the last sentence. This was subsequently accepted by Ernst & Young in July 2017. That should read July 2018.
Absolutely.
Thirdly, page 71. In the last line, there's a reference to a document, FUJ 00171778, and that's said to be the 15th of February 2019. That should be the 15th of March 2019.
Okay.
And I think that is actually correctly dated in the first line of para 292.
Okay.
Yes.
It is.
At page 86, please. At the top of the page, which is paragraph 338, the date of the document 3 lines in should be the 13th of May 2019, not the 23rd of May 2019.
Yes.
Thank you. I think the 6th amendment was just a typo, so we need to correct that. Can we go to page 115, please, in the hard copy? Is that your signature?
Yes.
And with those corrections brought into account, are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Cameron, I know that in your witness statement you make an apology.
Yeah.
in paragraph 6. There's no need to turn it up. But I think there's something additional that you wish to say now. So please do say that which you wish to say.
Thank you. I'm sorry that when I joined Post Office in 2015, I accepted without challenging the evidence that there had been no miscarriages of justice in the earlier prosecutions, which caused so much devastation to postmasters and their families. As a member of the GLO subcommittee, I am sorry I did not push against the lack of challenge and testing of Post Office's legal case. Had I done better in these things, we might have started the process of getting justice for postmasters earlier. I hope that my statement and evidence today assists the inquiry in its investigations and in getting to the truth, which is the least that those affected deserve. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cameron. You give evidence in your witness statements about issues that the inquiry call Phase 5 and 6 issues.
Yes.
And also some Phase 7 issues,
Yes.
which are bringing us up to date.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you about those Phase 7 issues today.
Okay.
If and to the extent that it's ever necessary to ask you about those issues, that will happen after the summer.
Okay.
Can I start with your background, please? You joined the Post Office in January 2015
Yes.
as a CFO,
Yes.
Chief Finance Officer.
Yes.
Between 2017 and 2019, you were jointly the CFO and COO, Chief Operating Officer, is that right?
Yes.
Between April 2019 and September 2019, you were the interim CEO, Chief
Yes.
Executive Officer.
Yeah.
And from September 2019 until the present day, you have been the Chief Financial Officer,
Yes.
Finance Officer, albeit you've been on medical leave since May 2023.
That's correct.
Thank you. Prior to the Post Office, is this right? You were a trainee accountant at Binder Hamlin from September 1987. You became a partner in Arthur Anderson in 1999. Is that right?
That's right.
Then Deloitte & Touche in 2002,
Correct.
again as a partner.
Yes.
That was in the Audit and Risk Management Department, is that right?
Yes.
You subsequently became the head of internal audit and risk management for Centrica PLC.
Correct.
And then from 2006 onwards, you held various senior roles at British Gas, including finance director.
Correct.
Thank you. I'm going to start towards the end by looking at a document called What Went Wrong, a draft for discussion. Can we look at it, please? Poll 0017 5235. So you'll see at the foot of the page, please, a little bit more. Thank you. This is your document,
Yes.
is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's dated the 19th of November 2020,
Yes.
and that appears on all of the pages. It's 7 pages long, and I'm going to spend some time on this document this morning, if I may.
Of course.
Because essentially it's a narrative account and your reflections, is this right, as at the 19th of November 2020,
Yes.
on what went wrong in relation to Horizon.
Yes.
So just to work out where we are in the narrative, the chronology, at this time, Paula Venables had ceased to be the CEO for about 18 months, is that right?
Yes.
She, I think, announced or disclosed her intention to leave in about November 18
Yes.
and left in about March 19.
Yes.
you had ceased to be the interim CEO
Yeah.
at the time that you wrote this document.
Yeah.
You finished in September 2019, so about 13 months before this.
Yes.
And at the time you were writing this, Nick Reed was the CEO, is that right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. If we just go to the top of the page, please. The purpose of, I think, the document is explained in the first paragraph. And you say, we need to explain internally and externally what has gone wrong around the historical postmaster litigation.
Yes.
And so by this time, November 2020, the common issues judgment had been issued.
Yes.
The Horizon issues judgment had been published.
Yes.
And the group litigation had reached a settlement.
Yes.
Standing back, what was the intention behind writing the document?
And I think it does say it in here. It seemed to me, and I had this conversation with Nick, for whom I really wrote the document, was that if we were going to say this can never happen again, which we were starting to say, of course there's a sense of that literally being true because we'd never prosecuted anyone again. But for that to be true, I think we had to have a proper explanation that satisfied us as to what had gone wrong. And the purpose of this document, because I had been there for a few years at this point, 5 years, was to write down what I had thought was gone wrong, not as a definitive answer, but as a first contribution to what I hoped would be a wider debate, so that out of collective experiences, you know, we would get something more definitive.
It's in its second line under the title, said to be a draft for discussion.
Yes.
Who did you intend to discuss the draft with?
I did discuss it with Nick Reed and Richard Taylor and Ben Fote.
And was that after it had been written?
I wrote an initial draft, which I discussed, I think, with Richard Taylor and Nick Reed, and they made some comments. And this was I believe, the revised draft after that and the final draft.
Can we just turn up paragraph 387 of your witness statement, please, which is on page 101.
Okay.
Page 101. You say the paper, and you're talking about this document we were looking at, was discussed, as you've just said, with Nick Reed, Richard Taylor, then Communications Director, and Ben Fote, and I believe helped to prompt some cultural change for the leadership team in early 2021. And then you say this, I had intended the paper to be a first draft to be built on by others to create a shared narrative for the Post Office to test against the future. I'm not aware that that ever happened.
That's right.
Do you know why that never happened, to your knowledge?
No, I don't remember us discussing it again. What I did see was some, good cultural challenge and debate in sort of January, February 2021, which I thought was helpful and which I hope this had helped prompt. It might not have done. But I don't remember discussing this document again after that.
You said that it was your intention to create a shared narrative. By that, do you mean that other people would add to and contribute to your document?
Yes.
And then essentially it would be settled as an agreed account?
Yes. Although, listening to this inquiry, I suspect we would have kept changing it.
Why do you think that?
Well, I've been absolutely staggered by some of the testimony you've got, particularly about things that happened earlier. And so I suspect whatever narrative I created then would have been very incomplete.
I understand. Do you know why the shared narrative, no matter how much it moved over time, never got beyond the draft that we see.
No.
Did any of the three people that you mentioned, Mr. Reid, Mr. Taylor or Mr. Fote, explain why it wasn't added to or agreed?
No, I don't remembering it being a definitive conversation. We just moved on.
Was there an acceptance by the three of them of what you said in the document?
Yes, I believe that, I mean, obviously, having been there longer, there were things that I thought I'd seen or knew that they wouldn't have done, but essentially I don't think they disagreed with it.
Thank you. Can we go back to the document then,
Yes.
please? Poll 00175235. In the first paragraph, continuing where we left off, you say explaining the past is essential to restoring trust with third parties, many of whom are understandably concerned and critical. It's important for postmasters who are working with us and should be reassured that they're in safe hands. It's important for longer-serving colleagues who've worked with postmasters, sometimes suspending, terminating and prosecuting. How should such colleagues interpret what the Post Office leadership asked of them and their own actions? It's also important to us as leaders. We must be clear what went wrong to prove to ourselves and others that it cannot happen again. And that's essentially what you said in summary earlier on.
Yes.
You say, firstly, there can be no doubt that things have gone materially wrong. We expect the total cost of managing and settling claims to be between 1 billion and 1.5 billion pounds.
Yes.
Was that a calculation that you undertook?
No, it was my sense of where it was likely to go at the time, and I can't remember exactly where we were in terms of the numbers for overturned historical convictions, but we were certainly starting as a much bigger number than is currently provided, I think. So it was a view of where it might go.
Secondly, we've been publicly criticised by Mr. Justice Fraser. Nick and I have apologised in public. Thirdly, we have not defended appeals against criminal convictions that we prosecuted. The purpose of this paper is to document my personal view about what has gone wrong. It relies on my memory. That will be wrong or incomplete in places. A lot of public studies show that memories are not reliable. I joined in 2015, so many of the critical happenings took place before I'm joined. I'm sure this narrative will also suffer from my unconscious bias to justify myself. These issues need to be overcome so a single core narrative can emerge. More voices need to be heard with different perspectives, including postmasters and critics. We must be brave in getting it right without too much concern for consequences. We must be confident of our facts. A core narrative can then be distilled, enabling credible, consistent and durable answers for stakeholders. And then you set out under the executive summary the four main lines of criticism that the Post Office had faced. One, we've maintained an unacceptable relationship with postmasters that was self-serving, based on an imbalance of power and information and a skewed contract. Two, we were over-reliant on Horizon when we knew its weaknesses. Three, the original prosecutions were a deliberate miscarriage of justice. Four, we should have settled the claims, apologised and moved on years ago. We've defended ourselves to avoid the consequences, a waste of public money and a postponement of justice. In relation to those four criticisms, what was your view at the time as the extent to which they were accurate and had force?
So I believe through the two trials that this was a reasonable view of what we knew at the time. Clearly a lot has emerged since, which I think reinforces 2 and 3, particularly even in the last couple of weeks at this inquiry.
So at the time you thought that some of them, 1 to 4, had some substance, but your view has hardened in the
Yes.
light of evidence that you've heard,
Yes.
to the extent that you think they are made out?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
That 1 to 4 are, in your view now, established?
Yes, I think so.
Let's look then at the view that you took at the time in November 2020. You say, at the heart of everything, the original sin of the post office, and this may go back a very long time, is that one, our culture, self-absorbed and defensive, stopped us from dealing with postmasters in a straightforward and acceptable way. Just stopping there, to understand what you are saying and the status of what you're saying there, that is a conclusion which you reached at the time.
Yes.
Whereas the 1 to 4 above were the criticisms that you faced.
Yes.
Okay. So 1 at the bottom of the page is essentially your established view as at November 2020.
Yes.
Thank you. You describe it as an original sin.
Yes.
Why did you use that language?
I don't know, and it sounds a little bit overblown reading it again. But I think the point was that I think I was thinking about the management of shortfalls in branches and the view that, you know, I accepted when I joined, which was that postmasters were accountable for what happened in branches because post office couldn't know what happened in branches. And whilst there was a logic to that, I think it gave us too big an excuse not to really investigate what was happening and simply to accept that post offices were accountable. And, you know, then you had the prosecutions, and then, and I think it's a point Second Sight bring out, well, postmasters weren't necessarily being as open when they had problems because they feared the consequences. And so we weren't having the relationship we should have had where they could flag concerns, we would help them sort them properly, and we would work together to run a proper business. And so that was what I was, I think, trying to get at.
I see. You described there the post office's culture as being self-absorbed and defensive.
Yes.
Where did you form a view as to where that culture emanated from?
I think with all of this, I thought it had probably been there for quite a long time. But I think, you know, I'd seen it and had tried to argue with it in places, you know, around the response to Second Sight, around some of the media responses. And, you know, I did believe and do believe that organisations should embrace challenge and criticism and have dialogues with people, which is why I was, you know, so keen to talk to Tim McCormack in 2019 against advice, because I thought we were better being open.
By this time, you had been in the post office for nearly 6 years, January 15 to November 20.
Yes.
Had that culture that you described there of self-absorbed and defensive persisted in that period of time?
It was certainly true through, I think, the litigations. I think it was, you know, much less true by November 2020.
So certainly until early 2020.
I think that's probably about right, yes.
Can we go over the page, please? Oh, we have. You say everything else flows from that attitude and lack of balance it created. It skewed the judgments made about the prosecutions and the subsequent management of the case. The issues that followed are fundamentally for the board, executive, and legal teams in particular. And then you set out 6 other conclusions between 2 to 7. I've just described them as conclusions. Am I right to do so? These are, again...
That was what I understood at the time, but recognising that some of this, number 2, for example, was just, you know, I hadn't been there when that was happening, but that was what seemed to have happened.
So this is essentially what you believed had been established on the facts that you had seen in your 6 years?
Yes.
Thank you. So again, these aren't the allegations that we saw on the first page. These are your views.
Correct, and particularly views from seeing the Common Issues judgment and the Horizon Issues judgment, which had, and, you know, the really shocking discovery that there had been real miscarriages of justice because, you know, Brian Altman's work. And so, you know, this was where my views had shifted really significantly.
Thank you. And then if we scroll down, please. You, under the heading of the report, that's essentially your report, so you've moved on from the executive summary.
Yeah.
You then set out in bold some headings.
Yes.
And the first one, we've maintained an unacceptable relationship with postmasters that was self-serving based on an imbalance of power and information. That's back to the first point of criticism, the first line of criticism.
Yes, it's explaining more information below those headlines.
Thank you. And in the second paragraph under that heading, you say, the fundamental belief that guided the Post Office when I joined, so remembering that was January 2015, and which had guided it for many years, was that postmasters were and had to be responsible for whatever happened in their shops. Once the systems, training and cash were handed over, and however well they were handed over, the postmaster was accountable. Quote, we cannot know what happens in a post office day to day where money is missing. It may have been lost, stolen by somebody else or stolen by the postmaster. Whatever happened, the postmaster still owes us the money.
Yes.
Did that state of mind persist throughout the period, at least up until the Horizon Issues judgment?
Yeah, even the Common Issues judgment, I think.
The Common Issues judgment, I
Yeah.
see. And what you've put in quotation marks there, is that actually somebody speaking, or is that sort of a synthesis of the views that you would expect senior post office management essentially to express?
It's a synthesis.
Right. Over the page, please. Foot of the page. Thank you. 3 paragraphs from the bottom. You say, often defensiveness stopped us listening to our critics. When I became interim CEO, Tim McCormack reached out to me. Paula had refused to talk to him for some time. The advice of Mark Davis, communications director, was never to talk to him because he couldn't be trusted. I did speak to him on 2 or 3 occasions and found him to be honest, concerned, and trustworthy. He helped me understand and fix an issue and then praised us for it when he could have just made a public fuss. You
Yes.
referred to that earlier.
Yes.
And we'll come later on this morning or early this afternoon to that exchange with Mr. McCormack. Why did you decide to speak with Mr. McCormack?
I thought we should listen to the people who were criticising us, just as a matter of principle. But I was told that, you know, he was a sort of enemy of the post office and he couldn't be trusted, and he was just going to, you know, anything we said to him would be used against us in public. And I was advised to read his blog, I think, which I did. And I said, look, you know, this is someone who cares about post offices, not just the past, where he cared about that very much, but what was happening in post. He cared about post offices, and I would always have a dialogue with anyone who cares about post offices.
You continue, second sight, discussed elsewhere, challenged us on the principle that because disputes were not fully and transparently resolved, postmasters had little option but to hide them. This is clearly debatable, but I recall no debate. Their report was drafted a few weeks after I joined. This idea conflicted so hard with the fundamental belief that it was not really considered. Where you say it was not really considered, by whom or to whom are you referring?
To the leadership of post office.
And so can you date that?
Well, their report was drafted in, I think, April 2015 and published in the summer of 2015 or around that time. So, you know, I would date it to that, I think.
And was that amongst the general executive generally?
Yeah, and the board. I mean, I don't think we debated that point that I recall.
You continue, the judge's view, that's Mr. Justice Fraser,
Yeah.
made a difference to me. In summer 2019, a post office came to me because they had a £4,000 shortage. I asked the network operations team to investigate. The real source of the issue was resolved, but it took months because there had been systematic misposting of stamps, which made it very hard to see what had been going on. We didn't chase errors in stamps because the postmaster would probably fix them, and it didn't cost us. I think, are you referring there to contact you had from the sub-postmaster at the Little Milton post office?
Yes.
And again, we'll come to that later today. Over the page, please. You say, following the judge's verdict, I raised my concerns with the General Counsel. Is that with Joe McLeod?
No, that was Ben Folk.
That was Ben Folk by then?
Yeah.
Because I was now thinking about the postmaster's experience, not ours. The network operations team now proactively encourages postmasters to get stamps right. Counts are checked in Swindon, and we do not convert shortfalls to cash. And then there's a passage in italics. Is it that essentially your conclusion?
Yeah, it's my summary. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you say summary, it's
Summary of that section.
a summary of that section,
Yeah.
and you will see arrive at a series of wrongs, as you describe them,
Yes.
post office wrongs,
Yes.
and this is essentially your assessment.
Yes.
The first and fundamental wrong is that our culture, self-absorbed and defensive, stopped us from dealing with sub-postmasters in a straightforward and acceptable way, and that correlates to number 1 of 7 on
Yep.
the executive summary. We did not engage with postmasters with an open mind or listen properly to their concerns. We prioritise issues according to their materiality to us and not to a single postmaster. We did not serve and assist postmasters. Training was not good enough. Support was hard to access and of limited duration and insight. We lacked transparency with postmasters. We did not resolve underlying issues, allowing them to recur continuously as we prioritised other change and our journey to profit. By forcing postmasters to be responsible for branch outcomes, they were more likely to pay for a shortfall or even accept a minor charge to avoid a major one. There was never a clear, transparent and objective process to resolve issues, and arguably still isn't. We didn't engage with critics. We were convinced we were a good thing for the UK, and anyone criticising was attacking. We defended or stayed silent. There's quite a lot there in those conclusions.
Yep.
But you were satisfied that on the basis of your 6 years' experience working at a high level within the post office, each and every one of those facts was established.
Yes.
Thank you. Can we turn to the second criticism that's put, the 1 of 4, in bold? We were over-reliant on Horizon when we knew its weaknesses. You go on to address that. You say, in 2014, Post Office stopped prosecuting postmasters if the prosecution would place material reliance on evidence from Horizon. I do not think this decision included a full review of the implications for earlier prosecutions. Clearly should have done. It's important to know whether that question was badly addressed or not addressed at all. The first sentence is certainly accurate. The second sentence, where you say, I do not think this decision included a full review of the implications for earlier prosecutions. What did you know about what work had been done in the year and a half before you joined to review earlier prosecutions?
Nothing. I wasn't aware of any, but as I say at the beginning of this document, this is just me writing down without research what I understood at that time to then work with others to get a complete narrative. So I wouldn't have made this statement in a more formal document because I hadn't actually gone and researched it. That was just my understanding at the time.
You say, in my time, I do not recall until this year, but may have forgotten, any discussion of the ongoing duties of prosecutors, nor do I recall any review of historic issues with Horizon. Having reviewed the appeal cases in 2020, the board has concluded that disclosure of historical horizon issues should have been made. The board chose not to oppose appeals where the evidence relied on horizon.
Yeah.
And we know about that decision, and
Yeah.
we know the board minutes of it. Were you a party to that decision making?
Can you be a tiny bit more precise?
Yes, in mid-2020, mid to
Yes.
late 2020, you were.
Yeah, no, I joined board meetings on that.
You say that the board has concluded that disclosures of historical horizon issues should have been made. Can you be more precise as to what those disclosures were that you're talking about there?
No, I mean, I can't remember what I was referring to specifically.
But your view was that the board had accepted that the Post Office ought to have disclosed much earlier than it did historical horizon issues.
Yeah, they should have been disclosed at the time of the initial trials, I think.
You continue the media interpretation that the shortfalls were entirely caused by system issues and never theft or lack of management doesn't ring true. Many certainly hid issues and lied. Some will have stolen money or failed to manage it. However, that's now irrelevant. The convictions were and are unsafe. The convictions must be overturned. No good can be served from seeking retrials. The postmasters are therefore innocent.
Yeah.
Why were you making that point? Was there still a view within the Post Office that the sub-postmasters may still be guilty?
It may have been partly that, although I think the Post Office was not having a view on that so much as, you know, lawyers having a view of that as they were working through the schemes. But I think, you know, and this may just display my real ignorance of legal processes, you know, it had seemed to me that if you hadn't had a fair trial, you can't have been found properly guilty, therefore you must be innocent because you're innocent until proven guilty. Whereas all the language around this is around convictions being unsafe. And I thought, well, if they hadn't had a fair trial, they're innocent.
I see, that's what that means, essentially.
Yes.
Got it. You say our legal advice in the next paragraph seems to have been wholly inadequate on the ongoing duties of prosecutors. Had we reviewed the prosecutions much earlier, we would presumably have known they were unsafe earlier, and everything else would have been different.
Yeah.
Was that a view held by anyone else in the General Executive?
I don't remember ever discussing it. I mean, I think it was, for me, I mean, we reached the settlement, Nick reached the settlement with the postmasters in December 19, and as part of that settlement, there was a review of the prosecutions was agreed. And, you know, I can't remember the exact date when Brian Altman concluded that there had been, you know, a risk of miscarriage of justice and informed the CCRC, but it was, I mean, I think it was about February. You know, so, I mean, it's a really short space of time with Christmas in between, and therefore when he got into it, it must have been really obvious that there was a problem, was my take. Now, all of that may be just inaccurate speculation on my part, but that was my sense of it, that if we had really tested the evidence properly, we would have found the problem quicker.
You say the second wrong is, quote, we did not disclose horizon issues to the defence when we prosecuted postmasters, especially between 2008 in square brackets, when evidence of concerns was emerging, and 2014, which is the date when you stopped prosecuting.
Yes.
The date of 2008, which you put in square brackets, which you say is when evidence of concerns was emerging, can you recall where you got A, the date, and B, the information that that's when evidence of concerns was emerging from?
No, but it must have been. I can't remember exactly where we were in either the sort of media narratives or what had come out of the trials. But I obviously had a sense, which has come out more in this inquiry, that, information was available which people should have shared with the defence at the time and didn't. And therefore, and I was guessing it was about 2000, and since I think I'd read somewhere that, between that sort of 2007, 2010, more information had emerged which should have been shared.
And so your doubt about the date is reflected by the use of the square brackets, is that
Yes.
Continuing, the third wrong, I should have said that second wrong corresponds to paragraph 2 in the executive summary.
Yeah.
The third wrong is that, quote, we should never have conducted our own prosecutions. There's an important duality in the state's approach where the police investigate and the CPS prosecute. By undertaking both functions within the post office, we set up a process that lacked challenge and independence. In addition, some of the behaviours during the prosecutions where we seem to be using bullying tactics to get postmasters to admit fault and take responsibility were unacceptable. Can you help us? Where did you get the information about the use of bullying tactics to get postmasters to admit fault from?
I don't remember exactly when different stories and narratives emerged, but what I'm talking about is evidence that, people were pushed to accept a false accounting plea rather than another sort of plea, and that, postmasters were told that no one else had ever seen this problem, and, my sense of the narratives was that people had, been pushed very, very hard to declare themselves guilty in a way that doesn't feel right.
And in your view, that was established on the information that you had seen in your 6 years in the post office?
Not from anything I had seen in the post office. So this is stories about the past.
Yeah, sorry, stories about the past.
Because obviously we hadn't been doing prosecutions in that period.
Over the page, please, to the fourth wrong. The fourth wrong is we did not reassess our behaviour as prosecutors between 2014 and 2020. And so you're talking about a sort of a lost 6 or 7 years there, are you?
Yeah.
Instead, we went forward confident that the post office was fundamentally reliable. We debated several times in 2016 to 18 whether we should restart prosecutions. Our legal team were rightly firm that we should not restart, but the reason given was that it might look as though we were being disrespectful of the cause. No one suggested that Horizon was or had been inherently inaccurate. And then I'm going to skip over those bullet points. Scroll down, please. You add Fujitsu did have remote access, which was identified in 2015, and then again later. There are, of course, contractual limitations with Fujitsu that are important to us, but are of not interest to anyone else. The date on which you say remote access was identified as query 2015, do you know where that information came from?
No, I think the question mark meant I couldn't remember. It was identified to me in 2016 and forms part of my witness statement.
Yes. You say, moving on, the fifth wrong is that, quote, we relied on anecdotal evidence that things were working properly without fully investigating on a proactive basis. There were limited and partial investigations around Horizon and related issues like suspense accounts before and after 2012, but they were never thorough or complete. We did not seriously test what Fujitsu told us. When we did investigate, we looked, quote, big picture and not at the level of materiality relevant to an individual postmaster. I'm afraid this is still true. So breaking that down, you say that we, the post office, relied on anecdotal evidence. What are you referring to as anecdotal evidence? I think about the reliability of Horizon.
So, I mean, I've been in a business whose main income system wasn't working properly, and it's absolute chaos. This isn't something you can choose. There are millions of stock transactions, customers are screaming at you, you can't answer the phones, you can't pull in financial information together. And Post Office in my time didn't look like that at all. So that was part of the sort of anecdotal evidence for me. And the DMBs worked. So the DMBs used the same system to process the same transactions, and they just weren't getting, as I understand it, the shortfalls that we were seeing in some agency branches. And that led me, to believe that the problem wasn't the way the software operated. I mean, it might have been in 2005 or 2007, but in the time I was in Post Office, it wasn't the software that wasn't operating properly. It was, and these are things that may have been absolutely contributed to by lack of support, lack of training, unclear instructions, but it wasn't, the post offices maybe weren't being managed as tightly as they were in the directly managed branches, which had much more experienced staff. So I assumed it was more a process and a control point rather than a software point. So it's things like that.
And so there you're referring to anecdotal evidence as meaning sort of macro level points, which you extrapolate to mean
Yes.
the integrity of the system is sufficient for everyone
Yes.
without drilling down to what you describe the materiality
And I think,
of any faults for an individual sub-postmaster.
and I think the materiality point is a really intractable one, which is why I make a reference to it still being true, because, Post Office, is a medium-sized business, and you are operating at a level of materiality which, is sort of hundreds of thousands to worry about an issue. And, our accounts are done in millions, and businesses of that size run in a certain way. But if you're a local postmaster, 100 quid might make all the difference to good week, bad week, whether you're making a profit, whether you're not. And I genuinely don't know how you maintain both levels of materiality at once. I think it's a really tricky question for the Post Office.
Are you saying amongst the fifth wrong that you write about there was that there had not been an independent and impartial investigation into the integrity of Horizon?
I think there had been some before my time. I think KPMG were involved in one, but clearly there hadn't been a really comprehensive one. And it's very difficult to prove negatives. I know a lot of work has been done since, but it is tricky to prove something's working perfectly.
Can we move on to, I think, what was the third allegation in bold? The original prosecutions were therefore a deliberate miscarriage of justice. And you say, I cannot comment on the motivations of the original prosecutors. I joined at the tail end of the mediation scheme. I never heard anything which suggested that the board had been anything other than straightforward in its desire to resolve issues and move on. I suspect, but cannot prove, that the Post Office people were in fact so convinced of their own positions that they interpreted every victory as being justice. If I'm right, this was less a deliberate miscarriage of justice as a blindness towards the possibility of a miscarriage. And then over the page, please. You say people underestimate the chaos and lack of control in Post Office in its early years as an independent business. What are you referring to there, please?
Well, I think it goes on to explain, and I set this out as well in my 2019 speech to the NFSP conference, which is that I think everyone assumes that because Post Office was a much bigger business, it had a degree of control and understanding that actually wasn't there. So it had been ripped out of Royal Mail at quite short notice, and its systems were incredibly old and under-investigated. At one point, I was challenging the idea that Post Office could have a problem with Oracle software that Oracle had never seen before, because it seemed absurd to me. And they just said, well, no other client has ever tried to upgrade 8 versions of the system in one go. And so it had been hugely neglected. It was old and vulnerable. And it took 4 years of effort to actually pull them out of Royal Mail and set them up on separate support, because people who built it had never occurred to them that that might be something they would need to do. Nothing was documented, and you always assume with an older business that everyone knows how it works, but actually no one knew how it worked. I mean, it either got lost in Royal Mail or people had retired. And often systems projects were tricky because no one knew how they worked anyway, and they were trying to rediscover that as they were changing them.
And sorry, did that extend to Horizon, the Horizon system? You took the view that nobody in the post office truly knew how Horizon worked.
Yes, it was an assumption that Fujitsu did. And generally, and I know it is absolutely absurd to talk about victims within the post office now because we know who the real victims are and they're postmasters, but there was a sort of victim mentality in the post office, which was that, everything was better 20 years ago, it's all someone else's fault and there's nothing we can do about it.
Did that include at the group executive level?
No, I think the group executive were trying to sort of challenge that. This was at more joint junior levels of the organisation, were just people doing tasks in a slightly hopeless way. And when I got more involved in operations in 2017, we sort of started at a really basic level of asking all the teams in places like Chesterfield to debate why they were doing the tasks they were doing, who they were doing them for, and what the difference between success and failure was. Because we had so many people who were simply doing a task, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, going home, and they had no idea why they were doing it or why it mattered. And so we were starting at a really basic level.
Moving on, you say the sixth wrong, and again, I think this falls in the category of things that you believe were established by this date, is that, quote, we did not and do not always balance the tactical battles with other priorities. And you continue by setting out the allegation, we should have settled the claims, apologised and moved on years ago. We've defended ourselves inappropriately to avoid the consequences of our actions. This has been a waste of public money and postponement of justice. And I think essentially you think that is established.
Yes. I think I then go through in the separate paragraphs to show why I thought that retrospectively.
Yes.
And didn't think it at the time, and what the narratives were.
Let's just look at those then. You say on the creation of Post Office as an independent business, the board set up a mediation scheme. This was coming to an end as I joined. Everything I heard suggested the new board in 2012 had set out to reach a real settlement so the business could move forward. This clearly hadn't happened. And then you say, and the narrative when I joined was, 1, we tried to reach a fair settlement. 2, we should not try and settle with people with criminal convictions. By definition, they'd been found guilty by an independent legal process. Many had also admitted guilt. 3, the amounts some people were claiming were disproportionate, school fees for years. This was opportunistic and unreasonable. Second Sight were the wrong choice. We should have got a proper accounting or law firm to do a professional piece of work and move on. Lastly, this was not the right use of public money. So you say that was the narrative when you joined in January 2015. Who was pushing that narrative?
So I think it was probably a collection of things, but this was the narrative as I recalled it when the decisions were being made in first half of 2015 to deal with the mediation scheme differently, shut it down, move on from Second Sight.
And who was pushing or peddling that narrative?
Well, I think probably sort of Chris Ojar, Davis, Paul are agreeing with it. I mean, I think it's in those conversations.
So pushed by Chris O'Yard and Mark Davis, but with Paula Venables agreeing to it.
That was my understanding.
What was the relationship between Mark Davis and Chris O'Yard on the one hand and Paula Venables on the other?
I don't know what the relationship between Mark Davis was with Chris O'Yard. Chris O'Yard wasn't there for very long, and I'm not sure I ever saw them together particularly. Mark appeared to have a strong positive relationship with Paula and vice versa.
You continue, Paula, that's Paula Venables, Jane, that's Jane McLeod,
Yeah.
and I discussed informally settling rather than closing the mediation scheme in 2015. And just stopping there, do you remember when that was in 2015?
No, it was a informal conversation. I don't remember it being.
What was the reason for the discussion about let's settle rather than shut the thing down?
One of us, and it might have been me, just asked the question, I think, which was, well, could we settle this? Because clearly, it was a big part of the business, and, we wanted to reach a resolution and focus on, the commercial business. And I think, so the question was, can we settle this? And the feeling I recall sort of Jane expressing was that we could, and I obviously remember the figure as sort of 20 million, but it would never, and this feeling grew, so I'm slightly worried about remembering later conversations, but the very strong view I think Jane held, which I agreed with during the development of the GLO afterwards, was that there was just too big a gap between the parties for us to reach a settlement that was sustainable. And therefore we had to test it in court in a kind of win or lose way, not just kick it down the road, because then everyone would know where they are and we could reach some resolution.
You continue, Jane's strong and unwavering view was that the issue could not be settled because any settlement would trigger a second wave of claims. Later, she also expressed concerns it might trigger a change in the CCRC view. Can you tell us what you're referring to there? Jane McLeod saying, if we settle in the mediation, this might trigger a change in the CCRC view.
I really don't, actually. I was reading this again, a few years later. I didn't remember that particularly. And I noticed it when I read it, because I remember the arguments being much more about, is a settlement sustainable? But I may be conflating 2018 arguments with 2015, so I don't remember it, I'm sorry.
On its face, that may look to be logic, that we can't settle essentially civil claims because it may affect the view that the regulator of miscarriages of justice, the investigator of miscarriages of justice, takes of us, and it might prompt the CCRC to think that there may be more substance in the complaints of miscarriages of justice.
I agree. At this time, I don't remember Jane saying that, but I obviously remembered it in 2020.
But the logic was, you continue, we've not done anything wrong. We could justify settling for 10 to 20 million pounds, but not hundreds of millions of pounds. Jane's view never wavered, and she was right on one aspect. The settlement of the GLO precipitated exactly the challenges and costs she was concerned about. This conversation recurred at different points. Jane's view was strengthened by the advice from our legal teams. We were going to win in court, and our contract with postmasters was lawful. And then over the page, this legal advice became increasingly fixed in place. In my view, the legal team of Jane, Womblebond Dickinson, and David Cavender, QC on the Common Issues trial, became an increasingly tight group that constantly reinforced each other's views, an extreme example of groupthink. But we did challenge, I've always held the view and articulated that you only end up in court when both sides have lawyers telling them that they have a 70% chance of winning. Just stopping there, you say that the legal advice became increasingly fixed, and you attribute that to Jane Womblebond-Dickinson and David Cavender QC, yes?
Yeah, and I think it's hugely influenced by the reaction to the common issues judgment. Because to me, that was a seismic moment, because we had lost on basically everything, and the judge was extremely critical. And I thought that was a real moment to stand back and reflect. And the legal advice was, no, it's the judge that's the problem, crack on. You know, we're not changing our position at all.
We'll see in a moment that you say that the effect was essentially to double down.
Yes.
You continue, Paula also questioned whether Womblebond-Dickinson were good enough. But Jane held the line very firmly, from a belief that a more assertive firm might make us look like bullies. With hindsight, a more assertive firm would have seen the pitfalls and kept us out of court in the first place. Can you tell us what you're referring to in that paragraph there, please?
Well, I think I remember Paula questioning Jane about whether Bond Dickinson were right, probably in 2018. And I think, you know, it did feel to me, and I think I make a reference to it in one of the emails, that the postmasters just had better lawyers than us, was my sort of emotional reaction to it. Bear in mind, I'm spectacularly ignorant of legal processes. So I think my recollection was that Paula did question Jane to say, look, you know, are Bond Dickinson the right people for us? And Jane said, well, they've done an awful lot of work over the years, and so they know a lot of information, and that's important, which I completely accept. But she thought that this was about the optics, whereas if we had employed a really big, aggressive city firm with that sort of reputation, we would have looked like corporate bullies. But my feeling is actually we look like corporate bullies anyway because of the size of post office compared to the size of an individual post office, and we didn't get very good advice, so it was the worst of both worlds. But some of that's retrospective.
I see. And so this question of whether Womblebond-Dickinson were good enough versus a more assertive firm, are you talking there about the substance of the advice you were being given, or essentially the nature of the firm, one Womblebond-Dickinson, I don't know, second division provincial firm versus a Magic Circle firm?
I've got no view on legal firms in that sense at all. So this was about, you know, were we seeing enough challenge and debate in the arguments? And, you know, I increasingly felt that we just weren't, and that became painfully true after the common issues judgment.
I see. So it's about the substance of the
Yes.
advice. I see. You continue. Mr. Justice Fraser was very critical of us from the off. When we pushed David Cavender QC on this, he said that he had caught the judge's eye and they were as one. Fraser was just posturing, so it didn't look like he was against the claimants. So just understanding what you've written there.
Yeah.
You were saying that you challenged David Cavender on this, and he was telling you that, in fact, he, David Cavender, had caught the judge's eye, and they were as one on the merits of the case.
Yes.
And that Mr. Justice Fraser's outward behaviour was posturing for the benefit of showing that he wasn't against the claimants.
That was my understanding, yes.
That's what David Cavender was telling you. Okay.
Yes. And I think this played to a whole, fundamental, it felt all the way through the common issues trial that we were fighting two completely different trials. So ours was entirely focused on the legal interpretation of the contract. Was the contract between Post Office and Postmasters legal? And the claimants were focusing on whether it was fair. And that was presented to us, I think, by David Cavender as evidence that the claimants had a really bad legal case, so they were having to resort to fairness because they didn't have a good legal contractual case. Whereas in fact, utterly the opposite was true.
You say when we asked Mr. Cavender if he might be wrong, he said that was his advice, and he'd been successful in a long career. When the Common Issues judgment came out, the board asked for a second firm to provide independent advice challenging our team's position. This was done with eminent QCs, but it was not explained to the board at the point of choosing this advice, again from memory, that they were all from the same chambers. We've seen quite a lot of documents, contemporaneous documents, that this concerned you.
Yes.
What was your concern that the advice being received was from barristers all within the same chambers? What are you getting at?
So what I'm getting at is that we had pursued a legal strategy that had proved to be in the Common Issues trial entirely wrong and failed. And what I was expecting had been a re-examination of our position, and that isn't what happened. There was a sort of doubling down. So I wanted someone new to come in and start with a clear mind and not be trying to defend what had happened in the previous year. And so I was worried when very quickly Lords Newberger and Grabner came in. And look, you know, in Jane's testimony, she may say she told me this, and I'm sure she's right if she did, but I hadn't clocked that they were all from the same chambers. And so my question was, were they going to be as independent and starting from scratch, you know, or were they going to be sort of briefed by David Cavender as a trusted colleague and, you know, and start from a different position?
You carry on. We were pushed very hard to appeal. Cavender constantly laded his comments with, quote, this awful judge, until I had to ask him to stop. Does that refer to you actually telling the barrister to stop saying something?
Yes, this was in internal conversations, and it's referenced in email in my thing. I think when I give a general business update to Tim Parker on email around this time, I make reference to this. So this is at the time, and so, you know, it was this awful judge, this terrible judge, this awful verdict. And I was saying, look, this isn't helpful. You know, we need to face the facts as they are.
The advice simply doubled down. Eventually, and really too late, we changed General Counsel, added Herbert Smith Freehills, and changed QC. Instantly, the advice changed, and we moved on a path to settlement. And then in the penultimate paragraph on this page, we accepted very bad legal advice. The board should have had the downside explored and the advice challenged much earlier, as well, of course, as assessing the earlier prosecutions. This has indeed been a waste of money and a postponement of justice. And so essentially you were finding the allegation that the claim should have been settled earlier, there should have been an apology earlier, and that the Post Office should have moved on years ago, established.
Yeah, and we should have, you know, I do believe, and it was in my apology earlier, that, you know, this was the first time I've been through a process like this, but if we did this again now, and the Post Office has learned some of these lessons, you know, there would have been vastly more board challenge of debate, probably a completely independent KC going through from a sort of claimant's perspective, and a real debate about the evidence on which we were relying. And I think we accepted the position that that was being done by legal teams, and we just didn't do it. And had we done so, given what we've heard since, and even what we'd heard in 2020, then I think the weakness of the evidence would have emerged before we went to court. But that is a retrospective supposition.
You say, in conclusion, the seventh wrong is that we did not sufficiently challenge and test our legal advice until it was too late.
Correct.
Thank you. That can come down, thank you. Speaking generally, how did Nick Reed receive this communication?
He and I and Richard, my memory is, debated it once, and Richard made some helpful comments, actually pushing me to the sort of sense that it was before it was a contractual problem, it was a cultural problem. And I thought that was right and helpful and adjusted it for that. And, you know, we discussed it again. And my sense was that, you know, they'd found it helpful and sort of broadly agreed with it, recognising they hadn't been here in those earlier periods and had less personal experience. And
Was there any sense that you got from the then Chief Executive Officer of the Post Office, Nick Reed, that anything you had written here was heretical or
No.
Fundamentally wrong?
No, not at all.
Thank you very much. So I wonder whether we could take the morning break now, the first of them, until 10 past 11, please.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cameron. Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Cameron, can we just pick up two last points in your what went wrong document, please, which I rather skipped over. Poll 00175235. Page 7, please. Four paragraphs on the bottom, starting, we should have been tackling these issues 10 years ago. Thank you. Do you see that paragraph?
Yes.
And then 4 lines in, if it can be highlighted, please, you say, Paula did not believe there had been a miscarriage and could not have got there emotionally. We believe there were material financial consequences that had to be justified. There was consciousness that this was public money that could not be spent unnecessarily. What did you base your view on that Paula Venables did not believe that there had been a miscarriage of justice?
I mean, everything she sort of said at the time. She seemed clear in her conviction from the day I joined that nothing had gone wrong. And it's very clearly stated in my very first board meeting. And she never, in my observation, sort of deviated for that or seemed to particularly doubt that.
And so she was unwavering in her conviction that there had been no miscarriages of justice?
As far as I was concerned, yes.
And did that persist right up until you wrote this document in November 2020?
As far as I know, obviously I wasn't. You know, I actually left the business in 2019.
Yes. And then in the paragraph below, please. In conclusion, because the deficiencies in the prosecutions had not been identified, Post Office did not believe there had been a miscarriage of justice. It was therefore impossible for Paula Venables and Jane McLeod to recommend a settlement that would have cost a great deal of money, an apology, and would probably trigger new claims and even change the CCRC mindset. Again, you're referring to a change of the CCRC mindset. To what extent, to your knowledge, was that a relevant consideration in not settling the claims?
My memory of it was not. I mean, my memory of it was that the real issue, which we debated quite a lot in 2018 and debated with the government in sort of October 2018, was that a settlement wouldn't stick. And so the choice was, do you fight a case, win or lose? Of course, we expected to win, but do you fight a case, win or lose, and then you can reach a settlement later that's in line with expectations? And obviously we'd have to have asked permission for the government for this money. But there was a kick the can down the road strategy we chose not to take, which was to settle. We thought we could settle purely financially in 2018 before the trials, and we could have done that, we thought. But the view was it wouldn't stick, because what we had already seen was people, I was told, had signed full and fair settlements, postmasters, in the mediation scheme, and then joined the GLO. So the feeling was you couldn't genuinely reach a full and final settlement for, 20 million quid. You might reach a settlement, but it wouldn't stick, and you'd have another case 2 to 3 years later. And we did want, to reach a genuine permanent settlement. But if we had settled then it would probably have been years before another case could get funding and work through and emerge. And that would have been the cynical strategy, which actually we choose not to take.
I'm interested in this, and it's the second time we've seen it in the document, that a factor brought into the calculus on whether to settle or not was that it might affect the CCRC's views.
And,
Did anyone express that?
I don't remember them doing so, but they must have said something, or I wouldn't have written it in 2020. But I must admit, I've forgotten at this stage. And I haven't seen, I've obviously, thanks to the disclosure, read an awful lot of documents over the last couple of months, and I haven't seen any reference to it.
Thank you, that can come down. Now, in a number of places in the document, is this right? You are either indirectly critical or directly critical of Miss Venables?
I don't know, actually. I can't remember what I particularly thought then. I don't know what I think now, and obviously I haven't heard Paula's evidence to this. The mindset I've been thinking about, it's very easy to sort of go through and say, well, yes, I was told that, so I didn't do that and I didn't know that. And the question I've been asking myself a bit is, well, if I was magically transported back to January 2015 and I was joining the post office, what would I do differently? Because clearly it's gone horribly wrong, so I would have to do something differently. Whether I was wrong at the time or not, it's what would you do differently? And I think it is testing and challenging that evidence. And clearly that hadn't happened. But what exactly, whether people knew and chose to disregard, or were just glib in ignoring, or didn't know, I don't know. And I think, you'll be the judge.
Do you accept that the document in places is indirectly or directly critical of Paula Venables?
Yeah.
Can we look, please, at PVEN 50445? It may be that this is only available in the PDF format. Maybe that there's a bug or even an anomaly.
Here we go.
Here we are, good. Now, this is a new document for the inquiry. We got it at 11:17 last night from Paula Venables. I think you have been shown it in hard copy just before you gave evidence this morning.
Yes.
It's been put on the tables of the court participants this morning. Ms.
Mr.
Venables...
Dean,
Yes.
can you tell me the reference again, please, so I've got a clear note of it?
Yes, it's PVEN 50445.
Thank you.
We've been told by Ms. Venables' legal representatives that she has conducted some further searches and has found some 50 additional documents that we're to get today ahead of her giving evidence next week. And this is one of them.
All right.
Can we see the date of it is the 28th of November 18. And if we look at the second page, we can see that it's signed off by you.
Yes.
You scroll down a little bit further. Yes. And this is your writing and your letter.
Yes.
Let's just read through it. So November 18, I think this is when Miss Reynolds would have told you internally, is that right?
Yes. That she.
People internally that she was going to leave.
Yes.
And is this letter written in response to that internal announcement?
Yes.
Dear Paula, before we get into a world of announcements, reactions and plans, I wanted to share what I'm feeling. Overwhelmingly, it's gratitude. I've loved the last 4 years. It's been a privilege to serve the post office, and that has been made possible by you. Does that say bringing me in?
I think it does.
Okay. Bringing me in, treating me like a valued partner and supporting me so well. For all of your generosity, thank you. Because your values are so strong, I've learned so much from you and often ask myself, quote, what would Paula do, end quote. I especially admire your self-control, your restraint, your constant desire to listen first, and your endless ability to make tough decisions and have honest conversations without ever forgetting the individual you're dealing with. You have a different and better impact than any managing director or CEO I've worked for. The joy of our culture is how unpolitical it is, how collegiate we can be, and how shared our sense of urgency is. None of that would have been created without you. However you're treated, I hope well and fittingly, I know and I hope you understand what a difference you've made to people's lives across the United Kingdom. I really can't imagine doing this without you. Thank you so much, Al.
Yes.
The sentiments that you express in this document, which, as I say, has recently emerged, appear rather different from the November 2020 document.
Yes.
So what changed?
Well, Common Issues Judgment, the Horizon Issues Judgment, and a recognition and the discovery that the earlier trials were miscarriages of justice and that innocent people had been sent to prison are the things that changed. And so, in the November 2020 document, I'm trying to give, a sense of how it could have gone so appallingly wrong. And obviously Paula had been running the business for a long time, whereas in this, I didn't think any of that happened. I didn't know that had happened. And what I was responding to was, a personal sense of gratitude. So the mission of helping the post office business work better to help post offices stay open is one that emotionally engaged me from the first day I heard about it in 2014 as a possible job, and has never stopped engaging me since. I think it's desperately important, and it's an absolute privilege to be able to work on that, and that feeling's never changed. And I was grateful to her for giving me the job and working with me and giving me the opportunity. And I had found her, straightforward to deal with. I think, the only caveat I would add is I wasn't trying to give her a performance appraisal here. I was trying to say thank you. And that was the nature of the letter.
You referred to information, facts and evidence emerging between November 18 and November 20.
Yeah.
Did that, in fact, cause you to change your view of Miss Reynolds and her conduct?
It causes me to be, far less sort of simple-minded about it. I had a sort of single view, and clearly it's much more complicated than that. But as I think I said earlier, I'm trying really hard not to form a final view of Paula until at least I've heard her testimony next week, and probably until I've heard the inquiry's verdict in due course, because I don't know what to think.
Thank you. Can I turn to the second topic, please, then? The Post Office's knowledge of issues with the Horizon system, and in particular your knowledge from January 2015 onwards. Can we look, please, at your witness statement to start with? It will come up on the screen. Page 2, paragraph 6, please. And I should say, Mr. Cameron, if it helps, I'm going to address some of these issues with a relatively light touch because of the answers that you've given in relation to the document that you wrote.
Thank you.
Can we look at page 2 of the witness statement, paragraph 6, please? I think we're switching systems. So we have a system crash because we had to switch systems in order to display the new document. I wonder whether we could remain in the room for 5 minutes with you switched off the screen, and we'll call you when we're ready.
I suppose prior to this inquiry, I might have been surprised about what are called system crashes, but perhaps not as surprised now as I might have been then.
Thank you, sir. So 5 minutes then, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. Cameron. We were looking at paragraph 6 on page 2 of your witness statement, please. And you say that, if we just scroll down, when you joined the Post Office, remembering that's January 15, the business was confidently communicating that it had found no evidence of faults with the Horizon IT system or that the convictions of postmasters had been unsafe. And then the last 4 lines, it became clear to me in 2019 that postmasters needed far greater support. This demanded a culture shift. In 2020, I understood that there had been miscarriages of justice which should never have been allowed to happen. And then if we go forwards, please, to page 23 of your witness statement. And paragraphs 94 and 95. In 94, you say, by the time I joined in 2015, the Post Office Board had concluded that its IT was old, underinvested and vulnerable. The Post Office's IT had always been provided by Royal Mail Group, but following independence, new separate third-party support structures had to be put in place by March 2016. And 95, there are a number of concerns regarding Horizon, the front office IT system. It was dependent on physical data centers which were old and needed continuous investment. It was time consuming. Sorry, if we just go back up to 95. It was time consuming and expensive to change. The contract with the systems provider, Fujitsu, was very expensive. It was slow and expensive to extract data from it. It was still understood to be operating effectively. And then lastly, page 105, paragraph 404. In my executive roles, I rarely got involved with issues faced by individual sub-postmasters, as the primary stakeholder relationship with the Post Office was through the network or retail teams. The teams I was responsible for provided operational support, and I tended to see that through the lens of collective statistics, control measures, efficiency and cost effectiveness. At the end, however, there are a few individual scenarios that I was made aware of during my tenure, which I set out below. And then you start in paragraph 405 with one in July 2016. Yes?
Yes.
So I just want to look, they're the paragraphs where you speak about your understanding of the IT system, the Post Office's view of its IT system, particularly Horizon, and the extent to which you got involved in individual cases.
Yes.
I just want to look at some individual cases, if I may.
Of course.
Can we start, please, by looking at poll 0010-2249. we'll see at the bottom half of the page, please. An email of the 1st of March 2015 in which Paula Venables copied you, amongst others, into an email chain of a complaint made by a sub-postmaster called Michael Crocker regarding discrepancies with Horizon. And she says, Miss Venables, I'd really appreciate your help. This complaint simply shouldn't have reached me. And then she says in her third paragraph, you'll see I've already asked for Angela to look into the complaint personally. This needs to be the priority. However, as I'm concerned about the helpline answers and why this wasn't immediately flagged and escalated, we know that scratch cards have caused problems in the past. And as I say above, I'd like confirmation that any of the Sparrow second sight themes are flagged so that colleagues know what to do if they're unable to resolve them at the first line. So go back to the previous page, thank you, and scroll up, thank you. Ms. van den Bogard replies, hi Paula, I've already actioned your request, dropped a brief email to Michael at the branch, and then some other information. Do you know why you were added to this email chain? What had it got to do with you?
At this stage, I don't think directly, so I got more involved in operations later, so my memory is that I wouldn't have been directly involved. Paula copied me in on a lot of stuff, but I don't know specifically.
This would appear on the documents that we've got to be the first occasion, you having joined in January 15, this is now March 15, in which you were you had drawn to your attention an issue that in broad terms concerned Horizon.
Okay.
Before you joined, had you read any articles or press coverage regarding issues with the Horizon system?
I don't remember specifically. I would have certainly, as part of the recruitment process, looked at press coverage, and I'm sure I would have asked, a question of Paula and Neil Haywood at the time of my recruitment as to what their view of that was, but I don't remember it specifically.
So when you had joined, there had been the Computer Weekly article in May 2009. There had been a series of BBC programmes, there had been the Second Sight investigation, the mediation scheme, the Second Sight report in 2014. When you joined, were you aware of any of that?
Specifically, I don't think I had read them, so I was aware of the general tenor and noise. And obviously, in my first board meeting, Paula in her CEO report gave a very, very strong view to the board, who had been around for a bit and didn't question it, that a lot of work had been done on these things and there was just nothing to see here.
And that the board should move along?
Well, certainly I felt my job, the reason I'd been hired, was to focus on the business as it was in 2015. And so I accepted that as I could focus on the current business. And what had happened before was, other people were been dealing with for years, and they were satisfied there were no issues, having done a lot of work. Clearly that was, as I said in my apology earlier, the wrong conclusion to draw, but it's absolutely the conclusion I did draw.
And so when something like this came in,
Yeah.
You're a copiee amongst quite a group of senior people. What do you make of it?
I'm not sure I made anything of this particular one. It wasn't my area of accountability. It was one email, and I was probably getting 50 emails a day. And I don't think no one was saying there can't be any problems or the branches can't be in the wrong position. And, you know, in the second batch of documents I got after my witness statement, there are a lot of these over the next, you know, there's a dozen of these or so over the next 3 years.
And I'm going to go through not
sorry.
all of the dozen, but some of them, some examples of this kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
And it may be helpful if you just describe your generic reaction to getting, say, a dozen emails raising problems with the reliability or the integrity of Horizon.
Well, so generally the pattern of these, having read them again over the last few days, is it's a dozen emails over 3 years, 4 years, so 3 years. And so I wasn't necessarily seeing them as a huge pattern. The general way this worked is they were triggered because Paula had personally got a complaint. She had then distributed it from people to look at. Every single time it is Angela who's asked to investigate it. And when there are a response back that I can see in the documents, and there are on some and not on others, it's generally quite a reassuring response in the sense of, yes, we've explained that postmaster's happy, that postmaster isn't happy, but I'm clear that this is what has happened. And so what I took from it, you know, rightly or wrongly, was that there was a sort of escalation because we hadn't resolved the issue properly the first time, and that is a good thing to have dealt with and recognised it, and that, you know, generally we had found an explanation that satisfied ourselves. And I don't remember any of them going, yeah, you know what, there's a problem with Horizon here. Okay.
Let's look at a few more with some variations on the theme. Poll 0023, 3291. Poll 0023, 3291. Look at the foot of the page first, please. This is an email from you of the 1st of October 2015.
Yeah.
The way the email's displayed doesn't show who you sent it to, but I think we can see at the top of the page, if we keep going, it was at least to Olwyn Lyons.
Yeah.
Yes. And then if we scroll back down to your email then, well, also to Jill, which I think must be Jill Tate.
Yeah.
Jill, my understanding, Olwyn may be able to confirm, is that the board asked a long time ago for us to ensure that there was a fully independent review of the new IBM software to ensure that it works accurately before we undertake the rollout. At the same time, we need to work out who is going to give expert evidence to the cause, that we can rely on the system to prosecute people for theft. Fujitsu used to do this, but weren't considered independent enough. Could you please give some thought as to how we do whatever you do to two birds with one stone? So firstly, the new IBM software, can you explain, please, what that was?
Yeah, so when I joined, the board had been going through a series of IT procurements to put in new support structures for the whole of Pol's IT landscape. And the assumption, as I understood it, had been that Fujitsu would be most likely to win the front office procurement, the sort of Horizon system procurement, because, I mean, they owned it and ran it and no one else understood it. But they had withdrawn from the process, I think just before I joined.
And just to stop there,
yes.
Is that part of what you were later to refer to in email exchanges as sort of a bluff exercise by Fujitsu as you saw it?
Well, I didn't know, obviously, but it seemed... I at least asked myself the question as to whether they were authentically withdrawing or merely putting ourselves in a position where we had to go back and ask them for more help.
Okay, sorry, I interrupted what you were saying. So you thought that Fujitsu would be the preferred supplier for the front office, and you were then going to talk about IBM.
Yeah, so when Fujitsu withdrew, what Leslie Sue and others were doing was to continue the procurement. And it is, with government procurements, you really do have to be careful about varying them at all. And so we continued the procurement, and IBM won. And what they were being asked to do was to build a new version of Horizon.
Yes.
So it would be more modern, it would be better digitally connected, but it would basically do exactly the same thing. And that was going to cost 100 million or so. And they won that procurement, IBM, and started working on it in 2015. And this got us into difficulty relatively quickly because this was a difficult thing to do, and it proved more difficult than we realised because actually no one knew how Horizon worked, and therefore recreating it without the help of Fujitsu was phenomenally difficult anyway. And actually it's a slightly maybe odd thing to do, with the benefit of hindsight. But anyway, that's what the business was doing. And so we were really in doubt that it could be properly finished and rolled out by the date when Fujitsu's contract ended. So we extended the support contract with Fujitsu to give us more time. But by, I think summer probably of 2015, early autumn, I was getting really anxious that the business just wouldn't be able to do the IBM work. So I asked Chris Bro, who was the interim CIO, as Leslie had resigned and left, to reach out to Fujitsu very quietly and say, look, if we don't do the IBM project, would you help? And, sort of come back, as it were. And
just to cut to the issue there, you foresaw the need for the supplier to be able to give an expert assurance to the court that the system could be relied on in criminal prosecutions.
So yes, and I'm sure we'll talk about prosecution. So, Post Office does give a lot of cash to a lot of people, and it has to be mindful that it gets properly looked after, and that someone might steal it or lose it or not control it. And that was part of our expectation at the time that we would go back to.
And so here you're referring to the proposed IBM system, not Horizon.
Yes.
Thank you. You say Fujitsu used to do this, i.e. supply expert assurance to the courts that we can rely on the system, but weren't considered independent enough. Who told you that Fujitsu weren't considered independent enough?
I can't remember, I'm sorry.
Had it ever been explained to you by this time, October 15, that the principal witness for Fujitsu, a man called Gareth Jenkins, had been regarded by the Post Office as being an unreliable witness who had breached his duties to the court in the evidence that he had given?
No.
By this time, had you been shown or been told about or even had summarised to you the contents of legal advice written by a man called Simon Clark in mid-2013 to the effect that Mr. Jenkins had breached his duties to the court, was a tainted witness, and couldn't be relied on by the Post Office again?
No.
Instead, it seems that you had been told by somebody that Fujitsu weren't considered independent enough.
Yes.
And that's why they weren't giving evidence.
Yeah, all through, sets out my witness statement at the time. I had a bee in my bonnet about making decisions properly at the time. And I was saying, well, look, and the view, as I understood it from Jane and the legal team, was, well, look, we haven't done anything wrong. And so the reason we're not prosecuting is to give the court cases time to work through and not to rile people. But we'll probably come back to it later.
When you said legal people, can you be more specific
Well,
as
I mean,
to...
Jane McLeod specifically. And so that was my understanding. And so what I was trying to say was, well, you know, under what circumstances, when, what would you need to do to believe that? And we did make another quite formal decision. I forget exactly when, but Paula takes it to the board or the GE, I can't remember. And, you know, it said, well, we're not doing it now, you know, and for us to do this again, you know, you would need a really reliable expert witness. And I think that's what, I'm not sure this was particularly obvious to me at the time, but I mean, that was clearly what Jane was working on with Deloitte at one point.
Thank you. And so your view in late 2015 was that the reason that the Post Office wasn't prosecuting wasn't because of an acknowledgement that it had done anything wrong in the past. It was simply a matter of choice.
That's right.
Thank you. Can we move on, please, to 2016? Poll 303-0012. This is an email. If we look at the middle of the page, please, from Roderick Williams, who I think you will have known as a member of the legal team.
Yes.
To Rob Horton.
Yeah.
Do you remember him?
Oh, yes.
What function did he perform?
He was the CIO who joined in, who I recruited, who joined from Aviva in April 2016.
And he, Rod Williams, says, I'm not going to take you to the whole of the chain because this summarises it. Paula, that's Miss Reynolds, has had another email from Mr. McCormack. It's typically intemperate, so I'm not inclined to respond. But he does say, quote, the very same error, i.e. the Dow-Mellington error, has just reoccurred in another branch in far more serious circumstances. Have you got anyone who can check this with Fujitsu? Now, I'm not going to take you to your witness statement, but you say in your witness statement, it's page 105, paragraph 406, in relation to the Dow-Mellington error, that when you joined, you understood that the problem had been resolved. Is that right?
Sorry, which paragraph is it?
Yes, page 105, paragraph 406. Let's look at it.
Yeah, so this is precisely dealing with this correspondence.
Yes.
So I saw the earlier emails up to the point, I think, at which Jane responds and says, you know, that we're on top of this.
Yes.
I wasn't copied in on the later emails, as you can see from the chain, but what I see in those emails, reading them now, is that Fujitsu came back and said, we understood this, we've already fixed the problem, 100 plus postmasters were affected and we've made sure that they're in good shape. And then you get the exchange, which I didn't see, with Tim McCormack saying it's happening again, which obviously would call that into question, but I didn't see that at the time.
I see. And so it's the fact that you weren't copied into the chain at the point that I have just displayed that meant that you didn't have the knowledge, that there was evidence that the Dow-Mellington bug continued to have effect.
Yes.
Thank you. Can we move on, please? Poll 2024 4301. And start at page 5, please. This is an email from Sub-Postmaster Kirsten Femeth in Horham to Paula Venables of the 26th of July 2016. And we'll see that later on, I think you're included in the chain. And the sub-postmaster says, I'm writing with an issue I've been having in branch. I wonder whether you can help. I seem to have hit a dead end with every other avenue available. I've been running our local plus branch since September 14. In August 15, we had a pouch of euros delivered to our branch, which was not input properly onto the system, so it didn't show in the stock. It was picked up in the subsequent balance. I called Chesterfield and Bristol to try and locate the pouch number, which would have rectified the problem, but no one was able to give me this information. Then there's quite a lot of detail. If we go over the page, please, and scroll down, the sub-postmaster says, in summary, we made a mistake. We asked for help. That help didn't come. It's going to cost me £1,400 that I don't really have spare. I'm not sure what you can do to resolve a potential system problem. It could take months. What I'm asking is that this sum be written off in recognition we're doing our best and have been failed by the system in getting a resolution. I'm exhausted with dealing with this. My integrity is bashed from it being implied I took the money. I didn't. That is all. And then if we go to page 4, please. At the foot of the page. Ms. Venables replies, Dear Kirsten, thanks for flagging this. I hope I can help. This is clearly taken too long to resolve, and I'd be as frustrated as you are. We're usually very good at resolving such issues. With 6 million transactions a day, we have to be. I've copied you and Angela Vanden Bogart. I know they'll do their best to get the right outcome. That's on the 26th of July. And then if we scroll up, on the 4th, that's it, the 4th of August, you email Angela Vanden Bogart saying, where are we on this? Thanks, Al. And just stopping there, why were you being copied in on this or being sent the complaint to deal with?
I can't remember, to be honest. I mean, the people who reported to me and what I was accountable for changed so frequently over this period. I can't remember. I can't remember if Angela was reporting to me at the time, but she may have just been. Obviously, I didn't become CFOO until 2017, so I'm not sure, but that may have been it.
And then to page 3, please. Bottom of the page. The same day, 4th of August, Miss Vanden Bogart replies saying Wendy's dealing with it. I've requested the latest position and will revert as soon as I have it. And then further up the page, please, 5th of August, the next day. The latest is we've had all the details we need from Kirsten, but due to the incident happening last year, we need archived data. This typically takes a fortnight to receive from Fujitsu. Kirsten is happy that this is being investigated properly. And then, foot of page 2, Joe Connor, the head of shared services, emailing you saying, thanks, update please. And then page 1, foot of the page, from Shirley Hailstones. Now if we scroll up, we've now received and analysed the archived data, and Wendy's writing up the full case report. And then there's a series, some details, which I'm not going to read. Go over the page. We scroll down. Conclusion. The surplus is showing present at the branch on the 14th. It's not in the branch by the time the overnight cash holding was declared on the 15th. We can therefore assume that during this time there must have been a corresponding error carried out in branch or a user error. Whether it be true or deliberate must have occurred. So what's the outcome as you read it there?
The outcome, as I read it there, is that the team aren't seeing a system problem. They're seeing human error, and they're going to be talking to Kirsten to sort of take it to the next stage,
Which will be for Kirsten to pay up, presumably.
presumably.
Can we go on, please, to poll 0017 4666? A letter of the 22nd of June 2017. And if we just look at the foot of page 2, please. Scroll down a bit further. You'll see it's from Nisha Kaur, a sub-postmistress, and it's copied, or said to have been copied to you. Can you see that?
Yep.
If we go back to page 1. Ms. Kaur says, Mrs. Kaur says, I'm writing to you out of a sense of desperation regarding present difficulties within my employment with the post office. I'd be grateful if you could spend some time reading this letter and helping to resolve issues in a speedy and timely manner. And then there's some detail, if we look at the foot of the page, please. I did not have any feedback from this until the 6th of June, when that's the auditor, visited again to tell me to close the post office business down for 4 hours whilst he and his colleague performed a full audit. I was told that both this audit and the January audit were faultless. He told me I could open the business and that there were no concerns. I spoke to him about the purported computer losses of £93,000. That's the auditor, said he had no answer. He phoned the contracts manager, who I've never met, who told him that Miss Kaur was not allowed to open. No reason was given. The auditor was surprised at this. And so again, this is not post office copying you in. This is the post mistress copying you in. What responsibility did you have for resolving issues such as the one raised in this correspondence?
So this was 2017, I think.
It is, yes.
It is. Then I would have
June 2017.
had responsibility for the sort of Chesterfield team, certainly. And so I don't remember seeing this letter or seeing additional email correspondence, but it's, horrible. And it should certainly have been properly looked into, and I can't recall whether it was or not.
Did these kind of things tend to get referred to Miss Van den Bogart?
I never felt I was the right person to investigate individual issues for a variety of reasons. I'm not trained to do that. I've never run a post office. I've never worked behind a counter or used Horizon. I've got no legal background. So I felt I was the wrong person to do the investigations. My job was generally just to make sure that they were being done. And was notable to me, looking over the extra documents I was to look at over the last few days, that, as I said, there's sort of a dozen of these. They generally start with a complaint to Paula, and it is always Angela Van den Bogart who is asked to investigate it.
And do you know why that was?
My sense at the time was that, and I appreciate this may seem counterintuitive, that very few post office people, in the head office teams had ever actually worked properly in a post office. There were some, of course, but generally, people in Chesterfield have been recruited to work in the support services, people in the field teams. And so the number of people who were actually experienced in running a post office and using Horizon were very few, and it was an issue. And therefore, I suspect it always defaulted to Angela, because she had, I think, worked in and run a post office and done years of investigations and was prepared to go out and talk to postmasters and visit post offices. And therefore, she was probably the best equipped to do that.
From memory, I think she told us she left school at 16 and became a counter clerk.
Yeah.
Can we move on? Poll 0016 3587. And look at page 4, please. And scroll down, please. We can see an email that you later get copied into this chain, but it starts with an email from Councillor Geoffrey Hipperson to Liz Truss MP. Good morning, Elizabeth. Help. Our post office, that Sholdham, is closing. The reason is disturbing. Apparently there are problems with the operating system of the post office computers, resulting in accounting anomalies. The amounts in our case bear no relation to the amounts that the postmistress handles. I'm as sure as one can be that the lady is honest, and having run the post office for 29 years, has not suddenly started making mistakes. Unfortunately, the situation cannot be endured, so the post office is closing. In fairness, I've spoken to representatives of the post office who are trying to get an interim person to run the office. What's concerning, however, is that this may not be confined to this one office. One ex-sub-postmaster has told me that, quote, there are hundreds of ex-post office keepers who have been under suspicion or worse because of this problem. I've no proof of anything and was only told about this yesterday. This subject and the possible implications of it are too much for me to handle. And then Councillor Hipperson signs it off. And then if we scroll up, please, and a little bit further, we see an email from Liz Truss MP to Ken Penton. And if we scroll down, she says, it's her caseworker, in fact, Ms Truss has been contacted by Councillor Hipperson. Can you look into this, please? Then scroll up, please. That then gets forwarded, if we scroll a little further, to Paula Venables on the 20th of May, saying, I've been contacted again by Mr Hipperson. The post office is now closed. Please look into the issues. And then scroll up still further. And a bit further, please. 20th of May, it gets sent to you directly. Dear Interim Chief Executive, I've been contacted again by my constituent. Scroll down. Post office is closed. Please could you look into the issues? And then scroll up to the top of page 2. Thank you very much for contacting me. We'll revert as soon as possible. And then bottom of page 1. See below, can we have chapter and verse tomorrow, please? And scroll up. This is from Jane Hill. What function did she perform?
She was in Mark Davis's team, I think, with a particular responsibility for dealing with MPs, I think. But, I mean, again, her role probably changed over time, so I could be wrong.
So was she a media and communications person?
Yes.
Why would the media and communications person be the right person to investigate and provide a response?
Only if the underlying issues had already been investigated and the business had reached a conclusion, and therefore it was about managing the communication rather than the underlying issues.
So when communication like this came in from an MP, that didn't trigger an investigation of the substance of matters?
Well, it might have done, and it might have done at some point, but it wouldn't. If people felt it had already been investigated, then it might not have done. It might have been, well, we think we know the answer to this, and I can't remember on this specific which one that was.
Just scroll back down, please. The people that you forwarded it to, Ken Penton, Mark Davis, Amanda Jones and Julie Thomas, were any of them network people or operational people, and if so, which?
So Amanda Jones was running the network for Debbie Smith, and Julie Thomas was running the operational teams.
The response, in fact, came back from a media person.
Yes.
And if we just look what they say, in summary, so there's a note attached, but in summary, the closure was due to our suspending the postmaster after an audit. The postmaster reported having regular balancing shortages after new Horizon kit was installed last July. The post office was operated from the postmaster's house, so difficult to put a temporary operator in. We're looking at the cost of a mobile post office. The contracts team are trying to fix a meeting with the postmaster. Ken has updated Liz Truss's office by phone today and is drafting a note for her. That doesn't really engage with the complaint made, does it?
It doesn't.
Which was from a councillor saying that his constituent had been a trusted postmaster for 29 years and had run the branch without problems. It seems new Horizon kit had been brought in, and then there was there were losses. Why was it dealt with in this way, as a media issue?
I don't know, and I haven't seen the attached note, but reading it cold, I think I dropped the ball on this one. I think we should have gone back and said, well, your answer is all about how we're changing postmaster and opening an office. It's not about the underlying issue, and I'm not aware of any evidence that I did that, and I should have done.
Thank you. Can we move on? Poll 00280270. This is an email from you to Ben Fote, headed confidential and privileged, of August, the 2nd of August 2019. And you say, I have been made very uncomfortable by an issue at Little Milton Post Office. That was the post office you referred to in your November 2020 note, saying in mid-19.
Yeah.
They approached me recently because they had been asked to pay a significant amount, £3,000 to £4,000 to us. Kim Abbott's got involved, but could not explain what had happened remotely. At my suggestion, an audit was held, and the belief now seems to be that there was no loss, just misbooking of stock and misremming of cash. However, Kim has not been able to explain things to my satisfaction. Could you please work with Kim while I'm away to understand what has happened and answer two questions? One, is our understanding of what is happening in branch sufficient for us to be able to ask for money or suspend postmasters? It doesn't feel like it. Secondly, should there be any implications for our defence of the group litigation? Giving our shareholders focus on a rapid settlement, I would rather you looked at these questions without it being clear I'm asking. I haven't used the whistleblowing process to protect privilege, but I am asking for that confidentiality and protection. You do not, therefore, have my permission to discuss this elsewhere, other than talking to Kim about the specifics. Is that okay? So I think this time, at this time, 2nd of August 2019, you were the interim CEO, is that right?
Yes, but it was, I think, A, just before I was about to go on holiday, but B, it was just after I was told that I wouldn't be the CEO and that Nick Reed had been appointed, and therefore I didn't know how long I would be at Post Office.
You say our understanding of what is happening in branch doesn't feel as if it's sufficient for us to be able to ask for money or to suspend some postmasters.
That was my question, yeah.
On what basis were you saying that?
Well, and I think, as we've seen from the evidence, I think I absolutely approached this differently because of the common issues judgment. I'm not sure I would have taken the same response the year before. But my understanding of what had happened is that Post Office had, it's a single till community branch, so £3,000 or £4,000 is just a huge amount of money for them. and were asking for help. And so I gave it to good people in the operations team, and I was expecting them to be able to explain it relatively quickly. And I sort of nagged them over that summer. And my understanding was that the problem is that people have been ill, have been temporary postmasters in and out, and that the stamps had been systematically misbooked in. So unlike cash, and this does need to change, stamps have to be, when they're delivered or picked up, they have to be manually keyed in and out, whereas cash, it's an automated process and you're barcoded and scanned, and that had never happened for stamps. And so there had been, I think, over quite a long period of time, lots of noise around the stamps, and so you couldn't see, or the operations team couldn't easily see what the underlying problem was, because there was so much noise on the stamps accounting. And my memory is that once that got cleared away, the branch was able to resolve the issue itself. I don't think I ever was told what had happened by then. They took it away.
But you're seeing this as an issue not just about the Little Milton post office?
Not at all about the Little Milton post office, really. I'm drawing a broader conclusion, which is if that can create so much noise, which was news to me, in a single post office, then how does that affect the way we're dealing with all the other post offices who might also have got into a muddle on stamps? And so, and that hence the two questions is, if there's noise on stamps, does that change how we approach other branch issues? And should we be disclosing this, in terms of the litigation?
You were essentially raising this as a whistleblowing complaint, but outside the formal process, is that right?
Yeah, and it's a bit odd, and it probably felt a bit odd at the time. I probably made Ben's life a bit harder. It was perfectly possible, I didn't know Nick at this point, it was perfectly possible he was going to come in and say, look, I've got my own finance guy, I want to start again, you're done, move on. And so I didn't know if I was going to be there for very long. And what I didn't want to happen was for this to be another of these kind of corridor conversations where, I flag a concern and then there's new people and everyone moves on and it's lost, because I thought it might be important. So my point about formally telling Ben and in writing before I went on holiday was so that he had to have a look at it and it had to be dealt with properly. I didn't use any sense. I think my recollection is that I told Nick about this in our very first meeting before we even started work. So I wasn't trying to hide it, but I didn't know how the broader business and the shareholder and everyone was going to react to, we'd had the CIJ, not the HIJ, and therefore was there going to be a kind of closing down and a moving on, or what are we going to throw everything open? And I just wanted it there formally, so it had to be dealt with.
Thank you. We'll pick up what happened after the second break of the morning, please. So can we break until 12:30, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, sir. Sir, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cameron. Can we pick up where we left off, which was dealing with the Little Milton post office's complaint? And we saw your email to Mr. Foat. Can we then turn to see what Mr. Foat did with it?
Yeah.
By looking at poll 00327569. That's the first page. That's Mr. Foat's email. If we just look at the second page, we can see your email that we've just looked at. And so he forwards it on. Yes? And then if we go back to page 1, please. He sends your email under the heading strictly confidential and privileged, highly sensitive, not for further forwarding, to Glenn Hall, who I think was a lawyer at Norton Rose.
Yes.
To Katrina Smith, also a lawyer at Norton Rose, is that right?
I don't know.
And Patrick Bork, the Director of Public and Government Affairs.
Yes.
What was Norton Rose's role at this time? Can you remember?
I wasn't aware they particularly had one, so we brought them in after the Common Issues judgment when we were looking for more independent legal counsel. And they did do a bit of work for us, but the decision was to bring in Herbert Smith. So I wasn't particularly aware that they were working for us at the time, but that might have been the appeal.
Okay. Anyway, Mr. Folk forwards it on to those three people. He doesn't copy you in, but says, thank you for your time. I understand Norton Rose cannot act in respect of a previous matter, given a conflict which is understood. Unfortunately, I've received what I think is potentially another different whistleblowing event. This one is acutely sensitive and is only relevant to the post office, so hopefully there should be no conflict. You'll see from the email below that the current interim CEO, that's you, is potentially whistleblowing an issue in respect of our group litigation issue. In effect, that our procedures around loss recovery isn't right, and we are incorrectly seeking repayment for sub-postmasters, which is an allegation in respect of the group litigation, which your firm has some awareness of, I think. I should point out that the interim CEO was recently unsuccessful in his application to become the permanent CEO. He'll revert back to his CFO role once the new CEO starts on the 16th of September. From today, the interim CEO is on leave for about a month. Moreover, all of the general executive have been informed that the shareholder intends to penalise their bonuses as a result of the GLO. He, that's you, has sent me the email below. On the one hand, he says he hasn't used the whistleblowing process, but in effect seeks to do so and seeks the confidentiality and protections. This is not the usual scenario, given it's the current CEO of the company that is making the qualified disclosure. I've not managed previously an issue where it is the CEO that makes the whistleblowing. Under the post office whistleblowing policy, it can be made to a line manager through a variety of channels, which is subsequently reported to me as the General Counsel. I currently report into the interim CEO, who's making the apparent protected disclosure. I suspect that should there be further reorganising of the General Executive Committee subsequent to the new CEO, the interim CEO, CFO, will seek to rely on the protections under this disclosure. So just stopping there, there seems to be quite a lot of mention here about the fact that you were unsuccessful in your application to be CEO. Was the making of the protected disclosure connected to that in any way?
I didn't think I was talking about any of that, and I think, reading it, because obviously I don't think I saw any of this at the time.
No.
Reading it now, I just want to kind of give Ben a hug, because I'd obviously made his life incredibly complicated.
Yes.
He was really anxious about it, and I didn't mean to do any of that at all. And I think by using the word whistleblowing in a pretty vague and ignorant way, I think I just really complicated his life for a bit, and I hadn't meant to do that. Okay. So I just wanted it formally recorded so that we were definitely going to have a look at it and understand the view before we blew it up if it needed blowing up. And that was all I was trying to do.
I'm going to skip the next paragraph and read the following one. I should say I greatly respect the interim CEO, who I think has done an excellent job, and nothing above is to be taken to suggest otherwise. It does seem to me that this is an unusual situation which gives rise to some conflicts and potential risks for the business down the track, hence my seeking further advice. Could you advise me of what steps I should take, including what investigation I should undertake? What initial response should go back to Al, whether I can disclose to any other person, including the new CEO or shareholder. My understanding is not, at least. I suspect that if I'm instructed by my line manager that I can only speak to Kim, that I will not be in a position to come to any conclusions in respect of the questions that he is seeking. Look forward to hearing from you. What in the event happened as a result of your protected disclosure or your disclosure?
I told Nick about it, and I think then Ben and I think did have a conversation where he explained some of his challenges. I think I said, but don't worry about any of that. So work was done on it. I don't know what happened in terms of the two questions. There was definitely more work done on stamps, but I'm getting into an area where Post Office hasn't waived its privilege, and I don't think I can talk about that without them doing so. My understanding.
And so, just to test your understanding of why you can't speak, you think the answer to my question might involve disclosing legally privileged information after February 2020?
Yeah, and information that specifically Post Office still has.
Retained privilege over.
Retained privilege over.
Okay. Were you aware whether this issue was raised with Herbert Smith Freehills?
I don't think I know that. I probably assume so, but I don't know. And I don't know, what was done in terms of disclosure to the claimants.
Okay, just for the transcript for later references and not for you at the moment, the answer to my question about disclosure to Herbert Smith's is found in Poll 0028-0603, Poll 0028-4503, and Poll 0032-7575. So you don't know whether disclosure was made in the group litigation of the issue that you had raised?
I don't remember either way.
And you don't remember or you don't know the answer to your first question, i.e., what investigation was carried out?
I do know some of the outcomes of the work that was done.
Which aren't protected by privilege?
Well, I think they are protected by privilege really quite specifically.
Okay. Can I therefore move, if that's an area that we cannot further explore, to the suspense account?
Yeah.
Can we start with paragraph 159 of your witness statement, please?
Yep.
Which is on page 38. And you say in paragraph 159, on the 15th of January, very soon after I joined the Post Office, I was asked by Chris O'Yard, Interim General Counsel, excuse me, and others for urgent help to answer questions from Second Sight on the operation of the Post Office's suspense account. And so this is, literally the week or so of joining, is that right?
A couple of weeks after, yep.
And then paragraph 162, which is over the page. You refer to Rod Ismay, who led the FSC, was the right person to handle queries from Second Sight.
Yes.
Why was Rod Ismay the right person to handle queries about the suspense account from Second Sight?
Because I asked the finance team and they told me he was, the person who knew most about it.
And then at paragraph 165, which is at the foot of the page, you say that you saw a draft response to Second Sight, which you weren't dealing with directly, and on the 27th of January you wrote to Chris O'Yard and Jane McLeod that the response needed to be more comprehensive and data-driven. Okay?
Yes.
Can we look at some of the underlying documents, please, and start with Poll 0021-8942. And if we scroll down, please. And keep going, please. That's it, thank you. Email from Chris O'Yard to you on the 16th of January. I think it's the day after you were asked to address the issue of Second Sight's queries over the suspense accounts. Mr. O'Yard says to you, Al, for your information, just in case the well-oiled PA machine fails to ensure that this gets to you promptly. As you will see, I really need someone from your team who's technically switched on resuspense accounts and can handle themselves in front of an adversarial audience. As you can imagine, I'm concerned that we give Second Sight no more information than is necessary to address the narrow proposition that money is missing from a sub-postmaster's account, is somehow taken into our suspense account and then appropriated to our profits and loss. So Second Sight had asked for information, yes?
Yes.
And Mr. Oyard was saying to you that Second Sight should be given no more information than is necessary to address the narrow proposition made by them. Yes?
Yes.
Was that generally the approach that Mr. Oyard took, i.e. to be as restrictive as possible in the disclosure of information?
With Second Sight, yes.
Was that a theme of his engagement so far as you saw it with Second
Yes.
Sight?
Yeah. My understanding was that there was a disagreement about the scope of Second Sight's work, and I'm not sure I understood it very precisely, but what I took from that was that Second Sight had been employed to look at individual cases in the mediation scheme and to follow them where they went, whereas what they were doing on suspense accounts was exploring a hypothesis that money was being held there and released to the P&L, which should have belonged to postmasters, but which hadn't come from, as I was being told, the underlying cases. I have to say I thought this was a pretty silly point on which to pause, and quite frankly, if there was a problem in the suspense accounts, you know, as the brand new CFO, I wanted to know about it. So, you know, I think I generally sort of pushed back at this very narrow approach at this point.
Do you know why Mr. Oyard took a restrictive approach to the disclosure of information generally to Second Sight?
No, I did ask him. We came out of one. I mean, I never found Second Sight at all adversarial. The meetings were all extremely sensible and, you know, open. And I do remember asking Chris in the corridor after one of those meetings where he had been, I don't know quite what the right word is, sort of chippy with Second Sight, why? And he said, oh, they just annoy me.
They just annoy me.
Yeah.
If we go up to see what your response was to page 1, you say, Rod Ismay's the right person to do this. Second paragraph, as ever, I may be more inclined to be open, but while recognising the desire not to set more hairs running. The line, as ever, I am may be more inclined to be open. Did that reflect your general approach to Second Sight?
Yes.
And why did you adopt that approach?
If there was a problem in the suspense accounts or anywhere else, I thought we were better knowing that, and then we could deal with it. So, fine, we could close it down and push for time or whatever, but actually, I wanted to know if there was a problem. And I thought Second Sight had been employed by Post Office to do a job. You know, their view of this job was that they wanted to look at suspense accounts. We should let them look at suspense accounts. I couldn't see the point of saying no.
You say, whilst recognising the desire not to set more hairs running, what were you concerned about there?
So I think the concern I was hearing, you know, bearing in mind it was the second day I'd heard about this issue, was that I think, and I'm slightly trying to remember here, that there was a feeling that Second Sight would just go on forever asking questions that hadn't been sourced in individual cases, and therefore we didn't want to just be on a treadmill of forever asking questions. I think that's what I was referring to.
Thank you. Can we move on, please? A separate topic. Can we look at paragraph 111 of your witness statement on page 28, please? You say, with hindsight, I would now conclude that insufficient scrutiny of Horizon was undertaken before finding postmasters to be at fault for unresolved shortfalls. I think that's something that we've seen reflected in an email that we looked at earlier and in your what went wrong document.
Yes.
I also acknowledge that even as we sought to answer questions on the safe working of Horizon as it operated at that point, this does not mean that it operated effectively in earlier periods. I also question the conclusion that postmaster training was fundamentally sound. In 2017, when I was more involved in operations, I attended a 2-day training course for new postmasters and did not consider it to be a strong basis to support sub-postmasters. I later chased for improvements. As a result of this, I just want to examine what material you had at the time on these issues and whether hindsight was necessary to reach the conclusion that you did there.
So taking the points in turn, I think the insufficient scrutiny for unresolved shortfalls was a conclusion I reached later, and that was with hindsight. I think I was clear, I think I've seen emails as part of preparing for this, that I was making the point pretty consistently throughout, that just as I was saying this appears to be working okay in 2015, I think I acknowledged at the time that didn't mean it was working in 2005 or 2010, and no one was asking me to say that. I mean, the second site questions, for example, were all about what was happening in 2015. So I think I was very clear on that at the time. Postmaster training operated in 3 stages in 2017. There was some online training, which I did. There was then a 2-day classroom session, which I attended and thought, and there's an email setting this out somewhere, that it was really poor as a 2-day training course. And the third piece was, someone spending time with the new postmaster in branch for a couple of days doing the cash transfers and the balancing and that sort of thing in real life, and that bit I didn't do. So I wasn't making a particular conclusion on the whole of postmaster training, but I was really clear that the 2-day course was poor.
Thank you. Can we look at some of the underlying documents then,
Sure.
please? And start with poll 302-7728. And look at page 3, please. At the foot of the page. Keep going, that's it. Dear Paula Venables, this is an email from a man called Martin Barfoot, who I think is a member of the public, not a sub-postmaster. And this is a chain that eventually finds its way to you. Dear Paula Venables, I need to contact you directly to bring a matter to your attention. I paid my income tax bill via the post office on the 23rd of December 2014. The cheque was made payable to the post office, and the money, £3,885, left my account on the 30th of December 2014. Since the January 31st deadline for payment, HMRC has been sending me many demands for payment, including fines, as they've not received payment. I've had to make several lengthy phone calls and write 2 letters, including scans of my receipt and bank statement. I revisited the post office branch on the 28th of March and was told that the payment had been held up in a holding account, but was being directed to the correct account. I did not completely understand these details, but was assured the money would go to the correct place. Still, the demands and fines were sent to me, and HMRC had been phoning me, so I revisited the post office again and was told I needed to raise a complaint after another lengthy phone call. I did so. On the 7th of May, I've sent a copy of the scanned receipt as requested. 3 weeks has passed and no response has been forthcoming. I'm a home phone customer. I'm amazed the post office would not pay the bill, not return the cheque uncashed to me or the bank, not tell me my bill is unpaid, cash the cheque and keep my money for over 5 months. It's virtually theft. And then if we see what happens to that, please. Back to page 3. Scroll down, please. And again. Ms. Bennells, sorry, keep scrolling. Page 3. Keep scrolling. Thank you. Reply by Ms. Bennells on the same day. Thank you, first of all, for taking the time to let me know. First time I've heard anything like this happening. I'm very sorry and would be as frustrated as you rightly are. Please leave with this me. I'll get onto it today, and either I or one of my senior managers will respond to you personally. And then further up the page, if we look at the foot of page 2, Gavin, that's Gavin Lambert, on an email chain that you're copied in on, can you handle this personally, please? Although I suspect it's a one-offer. So I genuinely haven't heard anything like this before. We've been inept in handling it. I'd like to learn the lessons once resolved. More immediately and importantly, it would be unhelpful if any Sparrow connection is made, as reference to money held in holding accounts has also been voiced by the JFSA. My understanding this is not the case. Can I have this reconfirmed as well, please? So do you understand what Ms. Venables is referring to there, where she's saying it would be unhelpful if any Sparrow connection is made?
I assume she's referring to the suggestion that money is being held in suspense accounts.
I.e. this money might be held in a suspense account, a post office suspense account. We don't want a connection made with the allegation that JFSA is making that sub-postmaster money or disputed amounts of money is being held in suspense accounts.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I'd like it resolved today. Certainly senior contact made with Mr. Barfoot. I've copied a number of colleagues in, as I'm not sure who is best placed to help. Each person, please read and get in touch if you can help or know where to point him. Al is away, so Colin and Rod copied in his absence. And then, yes, just a little further on the Project Sparrow. Why would there be a connection made between Project Sparrow?
I don't know why Paula made that connection, but I mean, I assume it is because Second Sight were questioning whether we were holding money in suspense accounts.
And so any, would this be right, additional evidence of holding money in suspense accounts would be unhelpful?
If it's postmaster money, yes. But as I understood it and understand it, it wasn't.
No, this is a member of the public paying their or trying to pay their tax bill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how could a connection be made with Sparrow?
I don't know what Paula was specifically meaning, and I didn't interpret, I don't think, as anything other than suspense accounts is one of those phrases that people, recognise.
Was the post office at this time very sensitive as to its brand, image and reputation, and how that might be damaged by the allegations being investigated by Second Sight about the holding of sub-postmaster money in suspense accounts?
I don't recall there being a specific concern about suspense accounts in terms of brand image. It was just one item on Second Sight's list. Was Post Office sensitive to its brand reputation as the whole of the mediation scheme played out, was closed, postmasters continued to, say they thought things were wrong? Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, that can come down. Were you aware of any attempts made politically or with politicians in order to seek to ensure that politicians did not raise issues or focus on issues concerning the reliability of Horizon at this time?
I don't remember anything. I've certainly seen, a document in this pack where Mark Davis talks about it, although I'm not sure I saw it at the, maybe I did see it at the time. I don't remember it being a big conversation, certainly.
Let's look at the document I think you're referring to.
Yeah.
Poll 00152283. And if we scroll down to the middle of the page, please. There's an email from Mr. Davis to Paula Venables, to you, and to Neil Hayward. What did Mr. Hayward do at this time?
He was the people or HR director, I forget his title.
Headed Business Innovation and Skills Committee. So that's a parliamentary select committee. Paula, some good news. The chairman of the Business Innovation and Skills Committee is Ian Wright, a very good Labour MP, who both Jane, presumably that's Jane McLeod.
Might be Jane Hill.
Which is more likely?
I would have thought Jane Hill, personally, because she worked with politicians and worked in Mark's team, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Who both Jane and I know. Can't promise he won't look at Horizon, but much better chance of avoiding it. I've dropped him a line. You'll remember he was mentioned by the Minister last week. Was there an effort made by the Post Office, to your knowledge, to steer Parliament away from looking too closely at Horizon?
I don't know. I don't remember there being a considered effort. Were those arguments made in individual conversations? Well, reading this, yeah, it looks like it, but I don't know. I mean, I think probably, and I didn't remember this one, I just thought it was, look, aren't I doing a good job? Sort of, don't I know everyone? Sort of comms bullshit, really. I didn't take it terribly seriously, and I didn't think a select committee chair would have been put off an important subject by an old mate.
You didn't get to see the line that Mark Davis said that he had dropped the chairman of a select committee?
Not that, as far as I'm aware, as I've seen since.
If the Post Office was confident in the robustness of Horizon, which I think it says that it was at this time,
Yeah.
why would the Post Office not want a select committee looking at it?
I guess because preparing for select committees, and I have done one, is a very serious and time-consuming business. You know, you don't just turn up and answer questions. You really, really prepare for them, and it takes a lot of a CEO's time. And so I imagine, you know, the reason would be that.
So are you saying you didn't take seriously the suggestion that the head of communications and corporate affairs was making, that he might make an attempt to steer a select committee site away from Horizon?
No, I don't think I did. Otherwise, I mean, if I'd been worried about it, I'd probably have remembered it.
Thank you. So it's 1 o'clock. I wonder whether we might break until 10 to 2, please.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you, sir.